ion that's produced leaves the red blood cell and is replaced by a chloride ion and is available to buffer the pH of the blood. The hydrogen that's produced, it binds to the hemoglobin, as we already saw, can increase the amount of oxygen that leaves the hemoglobin molecule, which is appropriate because this is happening at the tissues, where we want more oxygen to come off of the red blood cell. So the carbon dioxide binding directly to the hemoglobin and the hydrogen ion that's produced both increase the availability of oxygen to the tissues. Now this is a reversible reaction. Okay? This is driven by concentration. So if there's a lot of CO2 in the plasma, it's going to go into the red blood cell. If there's a lot of CO2 in the red blood cell, it's going to form carbonic acid. And if there's a lot of carbonic acid, more of that is going to be converted to hydrogen ions. This is happening in the tissues. All right, so this is driven in this direction in the tissues.
So
yes.
exercise would increase that?
Mm-hmm. Now, when this blood, the venous blood then gets pumped to the lungs, the CO2 is leaving, it's going to diffuse out of the plasma into the alveoli. And as we have less CO2, then we start decreasing the concentration. And so in the lungs, the reaction goes the opposite direction. The hydrogen recombines with bicarbonate ion. The carbonic acid dissociates not to hydrogen ions, but to carbon dioxide. Again, the same enzyme increases the rate of that reaction, and the carbon dioxide diffuses into the alveoli. Okay. And when we get to the urinary system, actually on Tuesday, and then again when we get to the urinary system, when we talk about buffers, carbonic acid is considered to be not a very weak, but relatively weak acid compared to the hydrochloric acid we have in the stomach. Let's look at that for a moment. Acidity is determined by the number of hydrogen ions, the concentration of hydrogen ions. The more hydrogen ions there are, the lower the value of the pH. All right? So when hydrochloric acid dissociates, it's going to form, one molecule of hydrochloric acid is going to form one hydrogen ion. When carbonic acid dissociates, it's going to form one hydrogen ion for each molecule of carbonic acid. So since each of them releases one hydrogen ion per molecule, why is hydrochloric acid considered to be a stronger acid?
Comes off a lot more easily.
There you go. Remember that word affinity? What do you think? It comes off more easily. So every semester I remind myself to check with my chemistry colleagues, and I always forget. Let's say we have 100 molecules of hydrochloric acid. I don't know the actual value, but let's say that 100% of them dissociate. We would end up with 100 hydrogen ions. If we have 100 carbonic acid molecules, maybe only 40 of them dissociate. So we end up with only 40 hydrogen ions. Hence the stronger acid with 100 versus 40. Okay.
I think it's actually like 1%.
Is it only 1% of carbonic acid?
It's pretty low, but yeah.
Which one is stronger?
Hydrochloric acid is stronger. Okay. So the strength has to do with the affinity. The stronger acid, there's a lower chemical attraction between the hydrogen ion and the base component of that molecule. Therefore, more hydrogens are released into solution. Okay. Now, in some of our case studies, all right, we've been looking at what was a normal PCO2 in the alveoli. So coming in from the body, the blood is, PCO2 is equal to 44, 45 millimeters of mercury, and leaving about 40. Okay? However, if you have a condition that prevents oxygen from diffusing across the respiratory membrane, such as pulmonary fibrosis, or emphysema where we've lost alveolar wall structures. Not only is oxygen not going to diffuse into the blood, carbon dioxide will not diffuse out. So as that blood leaves, it's going to have a higher PCO2. Okay? So it will have a lower PO2 because oxygen is not diffusing in, and a higher PCO2 because carbon dioxide is not diffusing out. So on Tuesday, when we talk about what factors, how is your respiratory cycling controlled, the most important factor, unless you have COPD, is carbon dioxide. And we're talking about arterial blood. That's what a lot of students forget. Because yes, it's normal to have high CO2 in the venous blood. It's not normal to have high CO2 in the arterial blood. All right? So as we get elevated CO2, that is a factor that is detected by the body first, rather than the drop in oxygen. Elevated CO2. Now with elevated CO2, are we also going to have elevated hydrogen ions? Yes. Okay, because CO2 is converted to carbonic acid. But as we'll see on Tuesday, as that blood flows through the respiratory centers of the brainstem and the medulla, the hydrogen ions will not leave the capillaries to trigger those chemoreceptors because of the blood-brain barrier. Carbon dioxide, hydrogen ions are too large. Carbon dioxide as a gas will, and this is arterial blood flowing into the capillaries we're talking about. So if CO2 is high, the carbon dioxide will diffuse out and will move into the CSF in the fourth ventricle. Guess what the CSF cells, the ependymal cells lining the fourth ventricle have produced? Carbonic anhydrase. And so there's a rapid production of carbonic acid from the CO2 that was in arterial blood that has moved into the CSF space, because that's how we make CSF, it's from the blood. All right, CO2 moves as well. Now that carbonic acid produces hydrogen ions. And those hydrogen ions are detected by chemoreceptors in the medulla. And that's what keeps you from being able to hold your breath.
What kind of cells produce those?
The ependymal cells lining the ventricular space. So we'll be talking about these factors. What does hyperventilation do? Okay, and looking at this in lab on Tuesday as well, holding your breath, and I don't want you to pass out by hyperventilating, but we'll be looking at those components. So I'm done. You guys